60, so
30 minutes to 60. Can I trust you as a Olympic timer?
30 minutes.
yeah.
Incredible.
Anyway.
So I'm equally as happy to start off on the CRISPR point, actually.
Yeah, all right.
You want to talk about how your involvement with the CRISPR film, where you're seeing it going?
Yeah. Okay, so we got involved with the CRISPR film because we are probably the only people in London who really understand how to get a specialist documentary to a cinema audience. And we've done that with a couple of other films, and Roco Films, who are the sales agent for the CRISPR film, I know because we distributed a film called How to Survive a Plague over here, which was an Oscar-nominated film about the battle to get the American government and drugs companies to take AIDS seriously. And we did pretty well with that. I mean, we lost a lot of money on it, but we did pretty well with it in terms of getting it into cinemas and getting an interest in it. And that's how we know Roco. Okay. So when this came, and we've done a couple of other films for them, so when they got the CRISPR film, they said straight away to the producers, we think the people who should handle this are Dartmouth. So that's why they came to us.
So when you say that you are the only distribution company, production company, the only company that knows how to get a specialist documentary into cinemas.
Yeah. Well, the key to this is identifying this is not, by the way, what I'm about to explain to you is not that difficult a concept, right? The key to these... What? No. I mean, it's just, it's like, I don't think... I'm not about to reveal to you something absolutely extraordinary that nobody knows. But, the thing is, with a specialist film, you need to identify who the core audience is, right? The fan base. And I don't just mean people who are sort of half interested, I mean absolutely obsessive fans, right? And then you've got to find a route to those fans. And then you've got to find a way of making sure those fans are willing to turn out on the night, pay 15 quid or whatever to watch the film. And really, all that is a lot of work building relationships with organizations that might show those films or with organizations whose members are interested in them. So with a film like Human Nature, which is a CRISPR film, and a film like Human Nature, from the beginning, we wanted to have a premiere of it at the Science Museum in London. It's a massive IMAX screen. It can take, I think, about 400 or 500 people. There's an extraordinary network of connected to the Science Museum. And so it will be the perfect launchpad for it. So we got that. So, I mean, we had to put a bit of work into it. We had to persuade them, but it wasn't the hardest thing in the world to persuade them. But the point is that most distributors just would not put that effort into a specialist film because, it is a labor-intensive activity. And, I mean, we get away with it because we only have a small number of films at any one time. This is sort of part of our core business, distributing specialist films. So we've got a good network of contacts. We have, I think this is fair to say, we've got a very realistic idea of what the size of the market is for this, which generally is much smaller than the filmmakers think, obviously. So it's a question of putting those skills and that knowledge to work in pursuit of, a very small number of films every year. Okay. And we know all that because when I started Dartmouth in 2008, we started it as a production company to make feature-length documentaries to be shown in cinemas. There was all sorts of other stuff about my theories about how we could fund these films and how we would distribute them, etc. But the films we were going to make were feature documentaries that had an impact, right? So so documentaries is a minute section of the market. Feature documentaries is a smaller section of a small section, and feature documentaries that try to have an impact is like minute section of the market. So we completely dominate a minute section of the market.
Which is
which is fine. Anyway, and of course what we quickly discovered was that none of the main distributors, including, it should be said, Dogworth, really wanted to take on films of this sort. I mean, I've got a massive admiration for Dogworth. They started more or less the same time, a bit earlier than we started Dartmouth, but one of the very first films they distributed was Black Gold, which was one of the very first feature docs I produced. Yeah. So I've known them for a long time. I have a really high opinion of them, but partly because of their success, they don't, they just can't give the attention that these sorts of films deserve.
They say because their slates are too big, they need to take the low hanging fruit.
And that's fine. I mean, that's fine. It's nothing, it's great business. Nothing wrong with that. But, they just can't take on these sorts of films. So so for us, so that's our opportunity. And so, Dartmouth's catchline is documentaries from dream to screen, and we can get involved in films at any stage of their process. We've got lots of dreamers, obviously, and so we've got various films that we have started, with, which we may talk about later, at the dream stage. But over the last sort of 8 years, people with films that want distributing have come to us and said, can you do it for us? And I think How to Survive a Plague was the first feature documentary that we distributed in the UK that we had not been the producers of. Right?
Okay. So I don't want to get ahead of myself. There's a lot of questions I want to ask on that. For the science, circling back to the Science Museum. How did you go about getting butts in seats for that? Was it leveraging the network that already existed within the Science Museum?
Yes. So it's they have their own network, which they just put up. We've shown films there before, right? Which was quite successful. We showed Particle Fever, which is a film about the Hadron Collider, we also were the UK distributors for that film. Which was a feature doc. So we knew them, although it's a completely different team there, but there's a little bit of sort of institutional memory, obviously. So it was simply a question of getting in touch with them, finding a date that worked for them, consistent with the dates that we thought made sense from terms of bringing it to a wider public, and persuading them that this was their sort of film. But it's obvious it's their sort of film. So the first thing, and they have a great network. Right, so that's fine. But then there are all sorts of other people who are interested in the film. Obviously, there's lots of scientists interested in it, right? But there's also lots of organisations in civil society, because the film raises these very important ethical questions about the use of this old technology newly discovered, right? Have you seen the film by any chance? No. The thing, what CRISPR does is it's found a way of being able to fiddle around with your DNA considerably more efficient than anything previously discovered. So it is theoretically possible that you could alter someone's DNA so that they did not suffer from sickle cell anemia, right? Or from other things as well. Now, at one level, this sounds great, until you start saying, oh, well, let's get rid of all people with albinism. Let's get rid of all people with Down syndrome.
Yeah. And I want my child to have blonde hair.
And exactly, that's right. So it immediately raises massive ethical issues, which are discussed in the film. All right? So there's lots of people interested in that. So it's a question of getting hold of those people and saying, we've got this film, we think you might be interested in it, we think your network might be interested in it, and encouraging them to do two things. One is, if the film is being shown in a cinema near to them, get people to go and see it, but also to organise their own screenings of it. Preferably, if you can do it, turn those into event screenings with discussions afterwards. Yeah.
So is that just cold emailing?
Yeah, well, I mean, in some cases it is, but, the cold call email in nearly every aspect of our life is not particularly effective. So, generally, what we'll do is say, well, do we know anyone who half knows anybody who works for this organisation or is a trustee of it or something of that sort? But, I mean, there is a degree of cold calling. Then tell it. But, in the end, we learn a lot of this because through crowdfunding. Quite a lot of our films have had crowdfunding in them, and we were, when we did it, we were the most successful crowdfunding campaign for a documentary in the UK. But we've also had some real turkeys as well, by the way. And that's what we learned from that, was that if you wanted the support of somebody to help you crowdfund the film, you needed to get them. You could have an email with them, you could have a telephone conversation, but in the end, you needed to get them to sit down in a meeting across a table and to promise in blood that they would help you, and then they break their words. Right?
Help you finance the film.
Yeah, no, just promote it. Just promote it, right? And they all say they're going to do it, and then about 2 of them do. So, we learned that hard. And it's the same sort of when you're asking them to help you distribute a film. So sometimes there is a bit of cold calling, but what we're always trying to do is get into a proper meeting with people and say, look, this is why we're not asking for any money. We just want you to let your network know that this is on, and we think that it could be of real interest and value to your organisation, and you may want to use the film. And obviously, if they want to screen it, we charge them a screening fee. We don't give the film away.
No. So in terms of a funding perspective, you mentioned that it seemed like you'd started the film with different funding objectives in mind, or you had sources of funding in mind when you started back in 2008 that shifted slightly.
Okay.
What changed?
No, well, let's just get that right. Mm-hmm. Let's just sort of get it. So my belief, I had produced this film, Black Gold, which is a film about the coffee trade, which had, and it was one of those things, it sort of obviously. It sort of fell into my lap in the sense that the filmmakers, someone said to the filmmakers, go and talk to Krista about it, maybe he can help you, So, it's their first film, nobody wants to meet them, they're completely lovely, charming people, they turn up, they got a box of tapes, and this was, you can tell how long ago that was, and I said to, so I said, well, I know that you got a film yet, we've got to find a really good editor for you, and they cut it anyway.
So you put them in touch with the editor?
So someone like work with you. Anyway, the point was that the experience of Black Gold and my continuing sort of disillusionment with British television, led me to a position at which I thought there is an alternative model here for documentaries. There must be a way in which we can fund these films with a combination of sources. There are lots of organizations, NGOs, philanthropic organizations, sometimes rich individuals who want a film made about some subject matter, right? And I thought there must be a way we can sort of lay our hands on some of those people's money. And at the same time, obviously if we can pre-sell these films to broadcasters, that's great, right? And if we can get funding from film organizations, that's, funding organizations, that's great. But the basic idea that was, I don't think you need to have a television commission with 100% of the money from a broadcaster in place before you make your film, right? There's a different way of doing this. And, this was all tied up with the growth of the internet and, the fantasy thought that, that it must be possible to reach the 100,000 fans of the film and charge them 10 quid for it. And so that's £1 million, and that's about 4 times as much as I need, and we're all fantastically rich and go to the south of France. Oddly, it didn't turn out quite like that, but there was this vision. Anyway, I had this. I thought there's a different way of raising this money for these sorts of films, and then of course there has to be a different way of distributing them as well. So that was the thought, and with the very, very first film we did was a film called The End of the Line. Which is a story about the threat to the world's oceans from overfishing, and which we raised money from a number of private philanthropists and from a pre-sale to a UK broadcaster. And that film was very successful in terms of it got into Sundance, so that was, brilliant. And then it had a massive impact. Companies changed their purchasing policy of fish, governments changed their policy on what should be protected species, and public awareness rose dramatically about the importance of buying fish that comes from sustainable sources. So that was an, enormously successful film, and in that respect. And furthermore, we had raised all of the money we needed for it, so we actually all got paid. So, but it was as we distributed that, and then other films came along that, we took on or that we were producing ourselves. As we were distributing, it just became progressively clearer that nobody cares about a film as much as director, and no distributor is ever going to care as much as a director, and nobody really knows as much about who the audience is going to be, other than, well, not just the director, but the director has a pretty good insight into that.
It's themselves, right? They've made the film because
they've made the film big, generally of those sorts of films, absolutely. So therefore, and it was really from that became progressively clear that we were building a skill set of how to distribute these films that could be applied to films that we'd had nothing to do with whatsoever. And the first film, I think I'm correct in this, I think the first film that we took on that we hadn't produced was How to Survive a Plague. And because that became an Oscar-nominated film. I mean, not through any of ours, of course, but it was quite reasonably high-profile film, and we sort of thought, well, maybe we can do this a bit more often.
Yeah. So what's the split now between stuff in-house, stuff?
Well, in terms of that's quite a difficult question to answer, because the staffing, obviously, of a documentary is quite you don't need any permanent staff. The only permanent staff I need for a documentary is myself and our head of production. But to distribute a film, I need permanent staff. So I have 2 people who work all of the time just on distribution, and it has a bit of my time as well. But of course, if we've just finished a film, a feature-length documentary, which we're the producers of, in terms of sort of turnover, that is much bigger. So I would it's quite a difficult difficult question to answer. But as we own the company, and I don't need to be too concerned about saying, when someone says, well, I don't need to say, well, 30% of our profits come from distribution and 70% from production. Nobody other than myself is interested in that, so I don't have to tell anybody that. But, I think basically I'd say about half of our time is spent on production and half is on distribution.
Okay. Do you personally have a preference on what you work on?
I think the most exciting thing is when someone says, I'm going to give you 50 grand for your film. And I think, yeah, that's it. And I sort of feel, job done, really.
And so in the production stage...
I mean, I love it all, I mean, there's not... it is really satisfying, and you write. We're not writing, and I'm not. We are writing applications for funds, but actually, normally what we're writing is business plans. Which is much more interesting thing to do.
Then please give me money.
What? Yeah. Well, that's right. Yeah, I mean, it's a business plan that says we need the money, and this is the vision for it. And all of that is great fun as well. And then. Obviously, as you know, making a film is a complete nightmare, because for a number of reasons, right? But there are great moments in it, and there's obviously it's thrilling, when you go and you look at a film in an edit and it's not perfect, and you can see the 3 things that need to be done to make it, 80%. Instead of 40%, all of that is just, it's fantastic.
Half the course.
Yeah, it's great. It's all of it. I love it all.
So production is such a general term. When you say production, are you essentially bringing freelance teams in-house to then create?
No, sorry. No, sorry, I interrupted you. No. I'm not being remotely helpful for you editing this. I'm
2 mics.
I'm completely aware of this, but you haven't asked me to give you nice, neat answers. I'm very happy to do that if you want. By the way,
I love this.
It's entirely up to you. Exactly I've done this, but sorry, what?
I'm the editor.
Yeah, you're the editor.
I love when
I'm very happy to take over the question into the answer and all that stuff if you want that.
No, please.
You're not encouraging me to, so I'm not making the effort for you. Yeah, great. Fine, okay. So what was your question?
Question was basically. Production is such a broad term. You yourself.
Yeah.
Do you do the shooting yourself?
No. So nearly all of our films are films that the filmmaker or someone closely associated with the subject comes to us, right? So very, very rare that I'm in a position of looking for a director. Right? It does occasionally happen, but it's very rare because most of our things are they're director-driven films or concepts, yeah? And so that's but then the people that we then hire, obviously, are likely to be editors, right? Often, first-time directors do not understand that the editor is more important than they. I mean, I can give you case after case after case of films that we've done that have been successful films that have got into big international festivals, been well, and the director just did not know that the editor was more important than they were, right? So that is often one of the things that I do. I say, look, you need a really good editor here, and here are some people who we've worked with before, and we know we are really good at this task. Yeah, and some people are more suited than others to certain sorts of films. Yeah. And then sometimes, we need to find the DOP because they just haven't got enough experience to know. They say, I've got some friend who's just, left the National Film and Television School and I want them to shoot it. And I said, I really think that's a really bad idea. Yeah. So yes, we do then, where people need to where they need help in finding the people to help them make their film, we find those people.
So you have to, I guess, the extension of that is you have to be able to work with directors that are comfortable being surrounded by people that are better than they are.
Yeah. I suppose that's true. I don't think I would have ever put it in those terms.
So it seems like at some point, Dartmouth must have been at the place where you, because of your own hard work, you weren't fortunate enough to be getting an overwhelming inbound amount of projects.
Yeah.
Was there ever a stage where you were having to go into the market and find directors or find filmmakers or attract projects to yourself? Because at this point, it seems like there's nothing meant to.
No. No, it's not. No. I mean, that's never. I mean, but that's partly. I'd spent 25 years working in television, right? First as a reporter and then as a producer, right? And to some extent as a director, but not on any important or relevant scale, right? And and I progressed, and there was a period of time when what we wanted to do and what we were good at, lots of people wanted, and tastes change, and we were increasingly out of kilter with what most British broadcasters wanted, right? And if we'd been smarter, maybe we would have adapted, but anyway, one reason or another we didn't, right? So when I started, and so that company went bust, right? And that was trauma, obviously. And then so when I started again, I was absolutely clear that, well, first of all, I had the benefit of starting with nobody, one other person, so there was no big overhead. But I also, and I didn't want to build an overhead again, but also I thought I only want to do projects I'm interested in. I really don't want to spend my time going around pitching to commissioning editors and them saying, well, if you could change A, B, C, and D into E, F, G, and H, then maybe we would be interested. And then going away and changing it into that, and then saying, well, actually, we would much prefer it if it was, X, Y, Z, and X, Y, Z being so far away from what I wanted to do, but feeling almost trapped into doing it. I didn't want to do any of that ever again, right? And so, therefore, there were some films. There are some films that we have made that I've wanted to make those films, and we've hired somebody to direct them. But overwhelmingly, the work we have is people come to us and saying, I want to make this film, or I am making this film, and can you help me? Overwhelmingly.
So I think a lot of people in the industry that we've talked to thus far would maybe more jaded, for lack of a better word, in the sense that they think in order to keep the lights on, you have to do the kind of work that takes A, B, C to X, Y, Z. How do you at Dartmouth keep the lights on by doing work that is ABC? Right,
okay. So I think there are three parts to the answer to that. I mean, the first thing is getting a mix. So we have some work where there's good margin on it. And that obviously helps for the work that isn't.
The margin's not
good.
The
margin's not so good. Secondly is on the projects we take on, insofar as we can, minimizing the financial exposure in the early stages, so that when the film is finished and goes to market, as it were, that we have a reasonable chance there is going to be some future revenue from it, right? Which is obviously different than the conventional television commissioning model.
Is minimizing financial exposure lowering the budget or shifting the financial risk to other investors?
Well, it's a combination of making it, of that, and also putting some of the risk up probably on the filmmaker as well. No, you can't expect to pay $1,000 a week for 52 weeks. That's just not going to happen. You want to make this film, I can help you do this film, but I can't, look at the figures yourself. So, and then the third thing is, and I get, just by the way, I often make bad calls on that. I get so excited about a film, I let money be spent on it which shouldn't be spent on it, right? And directors do things which, we probably come back to this later, but do things which I can see are the right thing to do, editorially and creatively, but they're just definitely not the right thing to do financially. And So I just want to emphasize, I don't always get it right by any means. And then, so just that was my second point anyway, is that you try to minimize your risk. And the third thing is, keep it small. Yeah. I mean, I don't mind that we are a small company, right? I don't have, I haven't got any. I wouldn't mind if it was bigger, and I wouldn't mind if it was slightly more financially secure than it is, but I don't want size for its own sake, right? I mean, it's partly, it's partly sort of what stage I am in my career. It's partly a question of, personal preference, but, keeping it small is sort of part of the trick of keeping it on the road.
Because with more size, there's more risk, of course.
Yeah, but it isn't just risk, because your question was, how do we stop getting entertaining ABC into X, Y, Z? If you're a big company, that is what you have to do. Yeah. So but if you say, I have no aspiration to do that, I have the aspiration to keep on, making and distributing high quality films that are going to make the world a better place than it was 5 seconds before it got there, then you can't be a big company and do that. Yeah. So I don't mind being small.
So at least not financial risk, maybe moral risk. Or
it's just a I don't want to spend my day doing it. Risk.
A life approach.
Yeah.
Circling back a little bit, you mentioned crowdfunding previously. Yeah. I think it's key for crowdfunding when it sounds like a lot of the documentaries you make have a really serious cause. So for lack of a better phrase, like an activated audience.
Yeah. You have to work really hard for it. Don't think that makes it easy though, by the way.
No. Do you have any key takeaways from the projects you've done thus far?
Yeah.
From a crowdfunding perspective?
So if you're going to do crowdfunding, these are the 3 rules. First, you have to identify your fan base, right? Fans, not just half interested. Obsessives, fan base. Secondly, you've got to find the route to those fans, right? Is getting hold of the organizations that the fans are going to be members of and persuading those organizations to be your unpaid marketing force to let them know this crowdfunding deal is on, right? And then the third thing, you've got to do that. And then the third thing you've got to do is you got to work 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, for at least 2 months. You cannot do this in the corners of your life. You just can't, right? Now then, and even when you've done that, you will find that not everybody who says they're going to help you helps you. And the other thing, which is really interesting, almost however much you're trying to raise, what you will find, you probably will, if you work out who your fan base are, you'll probably find that about 1% of your fan base will give you money, and you'll find that the average contribution is about £20 to £30. So if you say, I've got this film about the life of the urban squirrel, right, which is really, really interesting. Lots of films being made about that. I say, fine, who's your fan base? People say, well, anyone interested in nature. I said, no. The only people who are interested in this are members of the Squirrel Appreciation Society, right? And you find, I don't know whether there is one, but and you find who they are, and you discover there's 500 members, right?
Your staff. 5
of those people will give you money, they'll give you 30 quid each. And it's, and it is extraordinary how robust that rule has become. Just assume that 1% of your fan base will give you 30 quid, and that's probably how much you'll get. Now, having said that, in several cases, even some of our most unsuccessful crowdfunding efforts, the fact we were doing the crowdfunding gave the film a presence that did attract other interest and other money, right? So as long as you are realistic about it, saying for the crowdfunding appeal, this is the sort of the sum that sort of works, right? But maybe we will get a bit lucky because it'll be like a more general marketing, then that's fine. But you can't rely upon that. I mean, it's happened to us on 3 occasions where, quite substantial amounts of money have come in because we were doing the crowdfunding appeal. It just people heard about it who wouldn't have heard about it.
Yeah, I think there's something to be said for factoring in the cost of running a crowdfunding budget, campaign by just putting it in the marketing budget.
Yeah, but you put it in your budget, but you still have to have money to do it.
That's fair. On your second point, in terms of the 3 rules of crowdfunding, when you say you go to organizations who will then broadcast it to their members, are there any tips in terms of getting those giving away your money is hard. Is there any way to decrease the threshold of getting people to give you money?
Well, you're not asking them for money. You're not asking those organizations for money. You're saying, here's a film that we believe is of interest and value to you, right? And we are not asking you to pay for it. We're only asking you to let your networks know that we're making this film and ask them if they would like to contribute to it, right? Okay. So you're offering them something because you're saying that if we can get this money raised, a film will exist in the world that is of value and benefit to you, right? So that, I mean, obviously people need persuading of that, right? But that isn't the hardest argument to have. The hardest bit is getting them to turn up for a meeting to discuss it.
And for them then to flake off.
And I mean, we had one film and the director of it put a massive amount of effort into the crowdfunding appeal. And we did raise a lot of money for it, by the way. And there were about 50 organizations who at one level or another said they were going to help us with it. And in the end, it was a handful who really did. Yeah. Because, it's not the most important thing in their lives. They're often quite bureaucratic. Their decision making may be quite slow. All of these sorts of things, militate against it getting the position at which they say, "Oh yeah, we'll send out a tweet," which is not enough, by the way. Yeah, all of these are the reasons that militates against them really, really putting their weight behind it.
Have you ever experimented with equity crowdfunding?
Yeah, well, we haven't experimented with equity crowdfunding, and I wouldn't do that, by the way, as it happens. But we have had equity investment in films, but it's always been the people who put money into it have sort of known they weren't necessarily going to get a conventional return. And anyway, in this country, the main mechanism for getting equity investment into single documentaries no longer exists, so it's much less likely.
So do you as a company use SEIS?
You can't use SEIS for a single film anymore.
So do you?
They've finished. We have done, but you can't do that.
Is the loop around now that you can have a slate of films?
Yeah, you can. Yeah, but the thing is that the thing there is that's a completely different proposition because. We could probably raise EIS money because we're well established. We actually have an office. We have staff. There would be no problem. But we would be raising it for a slate of films. And actually, what we found is most people aren't interested in documentaries, right? I'm talking about not talking about drama. Most people aren't interested in investing in a slate of documentaries. They're interested in the subject matter. Just because somebody wants to invest in a film about saving the world's oceans from overfishing doesn't mean they're going to invest in a film that says the drugs laws are complete rubbish and need changing, right? The overlap, maybe a little bit of overlap, but generally speaking, that's not the case.
You can only worry about so much.
So
you can only worry about so much.
Well, yeah, maybe just people aren't interested in it. So I think that's the thing that we found because we have sort of discussed this with people that you can't ever offer an investor what they would consider a reasonable return. I consider the returns that investors expect are completely unreasonable. But you will not get a conventional return on your equity from investing in a portfolio of documentaries. So basically, you need investors who are interested in the subject matter of a particular film and whom therefore will invest in it, knowing that they might not get knowing they will get a subnormal return. But the mechanism by which one could do that through SEIS has gone now, see. So
is there no point packaging documentaries that cover the same subject matter into one slate?
I think that you probably could set up a company that said we're only going to make films about the climate emergency. But I would say, if someone came to me with that proposition, I'd say I just don't think the market is big enough to cope with a never-ending stream of films about climate emergency, right? So I'm not at all convinced that it's a good idea.
I wonder
you might, I suppose, be able to say we're going to make films only about the environment, and there's enough, general. You might be able to find investors there who sort of feel that's a sort of general enough but precise enough as well, focused enough proposition that they put money into it. So that might be possible, yeah.
So I think you seem to have a lot of skill with attracting private investment.
Well, not a lot. We've attracted some.
Some private investment. Of the private investment that you have attracted, do you have any takeaways in terms of leveraging relationships or how you've managed to get people to hand over?
Well, I think the remark I'd make, which applies to private investment and to philanthropic money, particularly philanthropic money from foundations that are still basically run by the people who set them up, or maybe the children of the people who set them up. So, I mean, there are big philanthropic organizations like Ford, or in this country, the Wellcome Trust. But these are big, really well-established institutions with bureaucracies and management structures in them, but then of course there are some philanthropic organizations that have been set up by people who made a fortune in the city or made a fortune in eBay or digital world, and which are basically the person who founded them influences the decision-making process. So what I'm talking about for investors and for private philanthropists of that sort, there are three things, right? The proposition of the film has to be 100% coincident with the ambitions of that philanthropist or that investor. 100%, not like 95%, 100%.
The vision has to be the same.
Yeah, absolutely. Has to be that. That's the first thing. The second thing, they have to be absolutely convinced that their money is not going to be wasted, that the film, not that the film's going to be cheap, but the film will be made, the film will be distributed, and the film stands a reasonable chance of having the defined impact which you say it will have. You've got to be able to answer those questions. So got to be a coherent plan. And it's obviously helpful if there are people working on it who've done this stuff before, so you can trust them. And then the third thing is there's absolutely nothing to beat the personal introduction, because everybody wants these guys' money, because so many things fail. What they want to feel is that I can trust this person with the money, and the thing that convinces them is when some other person they trust says you can trust them, they'll think, okay, that's all right.
And then I feel like that's a sense of discovery as well.
Yeah.
It feels like you've stumbled across this person that someone else might have introduced you to. There's something romantic about that, I think.
Well, I don't know whether, I don't believe there's any romance in
film finance.
Funded film finance. Absolutely right, yeah. Yeah.
So in terms of finding those people, this is a very absolute vague question. Do you have any practical tips?
No, I mean, you need to research it. I mean, you're saying, all right, you're doing a film. I mean, when we did a film called The Divide about inequality, which was, very successful in terms, it was in, hundreds of cinemas, and we've sold it to broadcasters all over the world, not to any UK broadcaster, but we sold it to Netflix. So it was very, successful in that respect. We identified the top 20 grant-giving organizations, not in the film industry, for whom inequality and the consequences of it was one of their main areas of concern. And then we tried to contact all of those, and we tried to find people that we knew who were connected with them, so that there was a sort of personal contact with it. And I think of that list, I think 3 or 4 we got money from, but it was a proper piece of research. You got
a quarter rate conversion.
Yeah, it was pretty good. Yeah, but we were ruthless in saying there have to be foundations where it is absolutely clear that this is core to their purpose. Okay. Yeah, not they might be interested, but completely core to their purpose. Yeah.
Okay. You mentioned before that not everything you do is completely perfect.
Yeah.
Do you have a mistake that is a favorite mistake that has led on?
Well,
to
I think you warned me of this question. I love the idea of a favorite mistake, in the sense that I don't think any mistake I would find. I think your question that you sent me was favorite failure. I think actually,
yes,
wasn't it?
Failure.
I think So that is without a shadow of doubt. Obviously, the favorite failure must be that the company that I founded and ran jointly for 21 years went bust. I mean, what else? Nothing is going to, professionally, nothing is going to eclipse that. Yeah.
Can you, if you would like to, can you speak about what you've done differently to ensure that doesn't happen?
Well,
again?
I probably not as much as I haven't done as much as I should have done to stop that happening again. But I think the one thing the thing that, lots of reasons why the company went bust, but the one thing that I was determined when I started again was to keep it small. and keep it tight, right? And not have a big overhead, right? It is quite hard to do that because as soon as you say, well, I need someone to do the production management, and there's got to be a set of accounts, and we've got to produce reports, financial reports, you already need somebody else. And then when you discover, and then of course when you're in production, you've got to have someone, as the office runner to, run around doing stuff, and so it's really, really hard, to stop it growing, It's really hard.
So how do you do it?
Just just sort of not allowing it to grow, I suppose. But that was the one thing that I learned from it, that keep it small, keep it tight. But the problem, the problem always is you see a film and you think there's a great line, right, in a Leonard Cohen song, the dealer who is waiting for the card so high and wild he never has to deal another. And we're all like looking for the card so high and wild we never have to deal another, right?
Even after you find said card, you will look for it.
Yeah. Well, I haven't found it yet, so wait till I get there. Then I'll be able to ask that question. But and I think you make these mistakes because you just think this is the film that's going to do it. Yeah.
So I think
make them all the time.
That kind of feeds back into what you said before in terms of where you let the creative or the emotional decision overrun the financial decision. You said that, and we might circle back to it. Are there any examples that come to you at the top of your mind?
Yeah, but I'm not going to tell you about them. I'm not going to tell you about it just because it's sort of, you've got to really know the film I've got to tell you the whole story. But, the mistake, I'll tell you when I said that, the biggest mistake that directors make is that, and this often happens when they get into the edit suite, that they fill their film with beautiful pre-recorded music. Oh, there's a great bit of Bob Dylan, we'll put it in there. There's a great bit of some blues music. Never put a piece of blues music in a film, because all of these artists were ripped off when they're alive, and their estates are absolutely determined not to be ripped off in their death, right? It is so expensive. So people, they get into the editor and the director get into an edit suite, and if they get on, which generally, obviously, they have to and they need to, and they say, well, let's put this bit of music in, this bit of music in, and we need a bit of archive here because actually what we shot isn't good enough, and they end up with a bill for £30,000 with no money to pay for it. That is the big mistake that people make.
So when you're in the edit suite, if you're talking to a director and you're talking to an editor, you're saying music, watch.
Yeah. Well, we keep a track, but it's really hard because, then you watch the film and it's better because of what they've done.
Yeah.
But you're saying, but look, how this film, we've got this film at, we've got it to a rough cut stage, and it's a really nice rough cut. But we now need to go into post, and it's got a lot of really ropey archive in, so we're going to have to do a grade, and you're going to do a sound mix, right? So there's nobody in London who's going to do all that for you for less than £15,000, and they'll be doing it as a favour. And by the way, you've also just got yourself an archive bill here if you want to release this film around the world, if you want to take it to market, and music copyright. You've just got a bill for £30,000. So where's the £45,000 coming from that's going to make this film market ready?
If you're saying it makes a better film by putting all of that in, is it worth doing that in order to get people's attention?
Yeah, well, that's right. And obviously what one does do, often then say, look, we can go now, we've got the film at rough cut stage, fine cut, with all this stuff in. We know this is how much money we need to get it market ready, but it's so good. Let's now go and show it to sales agents, show it to broadcasters, show it to other funders, and see whether you can raise the money to bring it to completion. But we do that, and we have succeeded in doing that. I mean, we have a film, coming out next year, which is the film that it is the archetypal dream to screen film, because I got involved in it and I gave 10 quid to it on a crowdfunding appeal, and the director rang me up and said, are you by any chance, Christo Hurd, who makes feature documentaries? I said, yes, unfortunately I am. And she said, so would you like to get involved in my film? And this was in 2009, and it's coming out next year in British cinemas.
Unbelievable.
Right?
Congrats.
So, but that film, I mean, she's actually, very disciplined director, right? But all the time we were making it, it has and it's the story, I'll tell you, there's a story, it's called The Atom of Love Affair, and it's a story of nuclear power from 1945 to the present day. So it's got lots of archive in it, a really unusual archive as well, and also some tremendous music, but mainly pretty unusual music, it has to be said, but relevant to the story. What we've done there, and there was a big archive bill at the end of it, so I negotiated a deal with the main archive owners that we would pay them to clear it for festivals and for UK limited theatric, and we would agree the price for the rest of the world but not pay them for it until we had actually sold the film. And then we made a television version of it, and the sale of the television version of the film around the world is generating the money to pay for the clearance of the theatric rights, which will be, I think, it'll be in the cinemas next year.
Incredible.
So that's the sort of thing you have to do.
Yeah. So were you able to carve out, just to be specific in that situation, you were able to carve out releasing it on television worldwide, and then covering the actual the rest of it?
Yeah. Okay. So that's what, and we had to, in the television version, which is shorter, we had to take out some of the more expensive stuff anyway. But that was the deal. We have been able to do that, and and most of the archives held by big agents. But a majority of the archive is held by the big agencies who I know well. We've dealt with them before, and they know we paid them some money, and they know we will pay them the rest when we get there.
Okay, gotcha.
So that is the sort of thing you have to do. But you have to think about that right from the beginning. That's the thing.
So you say she's a really disciplined director. We're going to wrap it up.
Yeah, you're going to have to soon,
Disciplined director. If you're talking to first-time filmmakers, I think your director and editing point is incredible in terms of the music. Are there any other pitfalls you see, because you work with first-time directors so much, that if you could take a few key takeaways that you would warn first-time filmmakers?
I think the thing is that actually what the question you sent was, what are the top three? And my top one is, there's many more than three. I mean, what I do,
I'm happy with the list of them.
But I'm not going to give you, I can give you a list of them, but I don't, that's the point that I want to make is, if you start off making a film, you have to think about every dimension of making that film from the beginning, and you can't leave anything aside. And I'm not at the moment even talking about the film itself. I'm talking about, how are you going to fund this? What liabilities are you building up in future because you're putting in copyrighted material? Who are the people who are going to help you distribute this film when it is finished, because they do not distribute themselves, right? You have to think about this stuff right from the beginning, right? You have to think, I want to send this film to television. It's got to be compliant with the regulations governing television broadcast in the country where you hope to sell it. Make sure you have got proper release forms when you go around filming. Make sure that people have been warned of why they're being asked to be in the film and not misled about it, because if they've been misled, it will not be on British television. You have to think about all this stuff right from the beginning, And then people say, but that's a producer's job. And I say, yes, well, if you can find the money to pay a producer to take this off your shoulders, go and do it. But you probably can't, can you? Because you're making a film for the first time. You've got to learn this stuff yourself, right?
Where would you recommend they learn these
Well,
things?
I mean, they go and talk to old people like me, who'll give them a lecture like I've just given you, so that... you have to just go and talk to people who've been around this track before.
I'd say you're wise, I wouldn't say you're old.
Thank you so much. I'm gratified. But anyway, that's the first thing I would say, and we haven't yet discussed how you're going to make the film. How you're going to pay to travel around the world, right? Or even, assume you haven't got any money to worry about, who's going to be in it? How are you going to create the right rhythm of it? Because I think this is the other thing. Lots and lots of directors, particularly people who've worked in television, think, a 75-minute film is a sort of 50-minute film with another 25 minutes stuck on it. No, it's not. It is a completely different thing. It's partly different because it's a different experience. You're sitting with a lot of other people with a very big screen in front of you. That is a shared experience, and the film needs to reflect that, even if it's going to be on television in the end. But if you're making it for the cinema, it needs to look like, feel like, be a cinematic experience, and that is quite different than making a television program. Secondly, holding people's attention for 75 minutes is a much, much harder thing to do, and particularly because most filmmakers, rightly in my view, want to make a film that tells its own story, do not want a lot of didactic commentary in it, whereas in television, you know, at the beginning, you can say this film's about this, and it's going to tell you this, and it's going to tell you that, and then it's going to tell you this, and now we're going to start telling you it all over again. You know, you can do that sort of stuff on television, but no one wants to do that. And fair enough. But that means that making the film is much, much harder. And you've got to know how to tell a story and what the scenes are and how you make a scene live and all that sort of stuff. And lots of people, they've never done that before, which is why they need editors who've been doing it for 25 years, because they do know how to do that.
Would you have any recommendations for where to find editors?
Well, I mean, you look at the films that, you know, homework. You know, I've said it, your homework on funding the film, homework on distributing the film, homework on who's going to edit the film. Watch the films you've seen that are really good. Who edited those? You know, that's, If you don't know the editor, who produced it? Go and talk to them, yeah?
Final question before wrapping up. If you're going to give advice to a driven college graduate, similar to yourself is starting a production company, either in documentary or in just narrative, what advice would you give them? Don't
be driven. I think the world's full of driven men, you know, far too much testosterone around. I think there is so I'll answer a different question than the driven bit, right? I do think the most important thing, if you want to be an independent filmmaker, right, is you start off with a micro personal business plan, right? You need to know how much money do I need to live on this year, right? Given the life I want to live. I mean, you know, if you want a life with foreign holidays and a car and a nice flat, you're probably going into the wrong business. But if you do want those things and you know how much money that needs, how are you going to make that money? What are the skills you've got that you can use to earn the money, to create the time and the space, both literal space, head space, but time, you know, what are the things that you can do to earn that money, to create the space to make your own film? Yeah? And there's nothing wrong, in my view, with making commercials, and, you know, nothing wrong in making films for charities, and nothing wrong in doing, you know, doing television, all this. I think it's absolutely great. But if you are going to be an independent filmmaker, making your own films that, you know, you don't rely upon the benevolence of a big broadcaster, you've got to have a little plan like that. You've got to know where you're going to make your money to create the opportunity to make your own film. And that is the most important thing for somebody to do.
Brilliant.
Okay.
Well, then that's
a wrap. Okay, so the film that I encourage people to watch more than any other is a film, The Times of Harvey Milk. A documentary made in 1984. Documentary, I'm not talking about the feature film which had, you know, whoever, Sean Penn or whoever it was in it. This is a documentary made about Harvey Milk, who was the first gay mayor of San Francisco. And it won an Oscar for Best Documentary. Hardly anybody's ever heard of this film. But obviously it's a good film because it won the Oscar. And why do I recommend it? Because I am sick of people telling me, oh, well, you can't have a film where you know what's going to happen, right? And this film starts with the final scene. You know this man is going to be shot dead, right? And then the film tells this extraordinary story, which is beautifully paced, full of jeopardy, right? With amazing characters and very, very moving. And it's a great film, but it's sort of this it answers this question which I think is so important, that the telling the story of the journey is more important than the destination. So, you know, otherwise people wouldn't go and watch Hamlet, because we know what happens at the end of Hamlet, you know, by the way, it's not changing. So, you know, that's the film. And the book, right? The book that I give away more than any other to people is a book called Getting to Yes, which is by the Harvard Negotiating School. I just wish every single director and every single producer and every single decision maker in film and television would read that book.
Is there anything else you'd like to say before you're out?
No, that's fine. That's it. Those are the two questions that you asked, and I thought, well, you could have that.
Have you read the follow-up book? It's something.
Yeah, it's How to Win Without Giving In or something, isn't it? Yeah, I don't think this is good. Actually,
Getting to Yes.
Getting Yes is the. I look at it quite often still.
Really?
Yeah, it's such a good book. Yeah, and because there's so many problems you've got. You know, you're always in this position. in filmmaking of always in this position of trying to persuade people that what they want to do can't happen, and them digging their heels in and banging on desks and things like that, and it's so useful to remind oneself of the techniques that you need to bring people round to a point of view they don't hold.
Which is your own.
Well, no, it's it is maybe, yeah.